You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.
Thank you very much, Blake, Eric, and Megan, and really well handled, Joe. So thanks for that great discussion there. Our next panel is sponsored by Bank of America Securities, titled Perspectives and Proposals from Inside the Beltway. We'll hear about regulatory developments and their potential impact on the options industry. So please join me in welcoming our sponsor. Aaron Rowe is Director of Broker-Dealer Sales at Bank of America Securities. Let's greet to the stage Aaron Rowe.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Our next panel is moderated by Steve Luparello, which was also our last panel of the day. Please welcome Steve and his fellow panelists.
So I'm not sure I've ever been introduced by somebody who was introduced by somebody to then start a panel by introducing people. So I'm not actually going to introduce you guys. So I'm going to ask you to introduce yourselves one by one, and then I think we're going to jump into what is a very robust agenda for a very short period of time, which I think aligns with the theme of what we have been talking about behind stage and before we were able to get together, around just how much the regulators are trying to get done in a very short period of time. So this panel will mirror, I think, what the industry is going through in terms of the regulatory lift and the pulls in a variety of different directions. We did get advice that since we're the last panel of the day, we should just feel free to go long. I think that was awful advice, and we're not going to take it. But we'll do the best we can in the period of time we have. So maybe starting with Jill and moving towards me, we'll do quick introductions.
Sure. So very quickly, Jill Sommers. I'm with Patomak Global Partners. I chair the derivatives practice group there. I started my career in Washington 34 years ago working on Capitol Hill, and then moved to the Chicago Mercantile Exchange and to ISDA, and was a commissioner at the CFTC from 2007 to 2013.
Hi, I'm Mark Davies, CEO of S3. I'm a bit of an imposter up here because these three have all been actually at the regulator, whereas I've never been at the regulator. I mean, I've spent time with them, but on the other side of the table. So S3, we're a regulatory vendor. I spend a lot of time reading regulations and getting ready for what's coming next.
I'm Gregg Berman. I've been at Citadel for about 7 years. Before that, I was at the SEC in the Division of Trading and Markets for about 5.5 years. So I spent 5.5 years reading comment letters, and I've spent the last 7 years writing comment letters.
And I'm not going to do my CV because I've made 2 full laps through the regulatory world, and we're already a little bit pressed for time. 3 of the 4 of us did a panel like this at this conference last year, and one of the things we talked about was the market structure initiatives that the Commission had put forward. There were 4 pieces to it. We thought maybe as a kickoff, we'd refresh where that is. Maybe, Mark, if you want to take the lead, remind folks what those 4 pieces were, where they are at this point, and where we think they're going to go.
Sure. So we'll start with just an outline of the 4, right? There was 605, which is the order disclosure rule. There's the order competition rule, which is the auction. I think that's what I called it last year. There's the best execution rule, which is effectively the SEC taking over best execution, moving it up from FINRA. And finally, there's NMS 2.0 tick size, overall a larger rule. So of those 4, we have seen a little bit of movement. 605 was approved a month or so, about a month and a half ago now. And that is due to go live on December 14th, 2025. So we're busy writing comment letters to try to understand the specifics and the details of that. But I assume everybody's as excited about 605 as I am. So that one, industry is very supportive of 605. It's an equities rule, so it doesn't affect you guys yet. Those of you purely options focused. The second one, I will say, is really the NMS 2.0 tick size. That's, at this point, I'm checking sort of regularly to see if the SEC has announced the meeting for that. We'll use the word imminent insofar as that word can be used to describe the SEC acting. I think we're going to see something about that fairly soon. If you recall, last year we were talking about the different levels. There was a penny tick, there was a half penny tick, there was a 2/10 and a 1/10. The expectation at this point, sort of the rumor, is that we're going to see it a half tick, which is consistent with what the industry sort of has pushed for any tick constrained rules, for any tick constrained symbols. There's variations in the industry on what tick constrained really means, but at the heart of it, I think we're likely to see something about that fairly shortly. And if it is only a half tick and is based on tick constrained symbols, then there will probably not be a lot of disagreements or litigation on that. The other 2 are in a little bit more of a longer term cycle. Best execution, haven't heard a lot of rumors about that. They've been sort of quiet about that one. Not sure what's going on. We were told that they do expect to get that one out. Last time I talked to Gensler, he was saying that they expect to see that coming out. Order competition, on the other hand, how did he describe it? He said, we've had a lot of feedback on that, so we have to digest it. That was the word he used. And so with the 605 rule, they actually removed the references to auctions. So previously in the proposing release, auctions were a part of it. They've removed that, so maybe it's promising that we're not going to have to go through that process, because that one would be litigated before the paint was, before the signature was dry.
So if I remember from last year, and Gregg, feel free to correct me, it seems like as we handicapped that set of 4 rules, right, the thumbnail was 605, maybe some opportunities missed in what it could have done in terms of modernization, but what it was doing seemed to be fundamentally good. As you say, the NMS 2.0, the excess fee, et cetera, it was a mixed bag. Some good, some really sensible, some maybe unnecessarily or troubling, and then the other 2, I think the expectation was that they would receive a lot of negative feedback. So if you look at where we are now, the one that people thought made sense has gotten done. It's got a very long lead time before it's actually in play. The one that was some good, some not so good, maybe they're listening to that and going forward with the good pieces and rethinking the more troublesome pieces. And the other 2 are a little bit, uncertain as to where they are. Is this a sign that the commission's hearing the industry and taking feedback, or is it more a situation where they're just waiting to do the things that they know are more likely to get the litigation and hopefully have some positive momentum? Should we have some optimism that the flow of information and the ability to communicate with the regulator is maybe a little bit more healthy than we thought based on where we are with those 4 rules? Or am I just trying to spin something that's just not true?
So I think you raise an incredibly important point, because those of you who have sort of been following how the SEC has worked over many years, this cycle is quite different. So at the very beginning, when they proposed the rules, and they were all proposed on in a package at the same time period, the biggest criticism was, you're going too fast and you're only giving us very, very short comment periods. almost to the point where that became like a congressional discussion. How long should the comment periods be? Now, to the extent that the SEC was planning on rolling something out 3 months after they proposed, you need a short comment period. But what happened was they had the very short comment period, and then they got quiet for an entire year. So they went for a very, very long period of time without really having much feedback. Most of it is like when you say, well, what do we think about Best X? Well, we hear a rumor here, we hear a rumor here. I'm not sure that the best way to get information from a regulator is a rumor. So I think we are all we're waiting to see what is going to be in the NMS proposal. Will there be 1,000 stocks? Will it be a half a penny? I think if you go back a few years before that, an adopting rule would never, ever be a surprise. No one had to read the adopting rule because if you didn't already know what was in there, the regulator was not doing a very good job, right? It's not the Academy Awards. It's not like it's supposed to be a surprise. This is what we're actually doing, right? It's supposed to be well thought out with an enormous amount of feedback from the industry. And I think this time it's been waiting. We just wait and see what happens. Every 3 months they say we're 3 months away, but we'll have to see what they come to.
I will say, though, that with the one rule we have seen, they took a lot of our feedback
Very fair.
into account. Like, they really did. They missed a few key ones that I would have really liked to see, but by and large, they really did take our 605 feedback. So the final 605 rule is a substantial improvement on the proposed one. And so, that I was optimistic about that. Frankly, I felt better about that than I did with the, what had happened with the 606. I think they really are, in that instance at least, they really did listen to us.
Although one could argue that that was the happiest of the 4 playing fields, and so there was going to be more willingness to try to meet in the middle when there was general philosophical agreement.
Yes.
Jill, we get a little too SEC focused in these conversations.
That's okay.
Given our collective backgrounds.
I'll just say I agree.
I was going to say. Then
the senator agrees.
Then you can always be on a panel with me. Do you get that same sense in terms of CFTC rulemaking? Do you feel like it's a little bit more opaque in terms of what the thought processes are, both having been in there and now being a very careful observer from the outside, or do you feel like kind of agency by agency they're doing better or worse jobs?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting dynamic at the CFTC because the chairman's agenda is quite transparent. He's talked about the things that he's wanted to get done his entire tenure. The problem is, where is he going to get the 3 votes to, pass any of the rules? And sometimes those 2 other votes come from the Republicans. So it's an interesting dynamic in how he's going to get to 3. And so what rules are coming up and what actually gets done, it's the wild card are the 2 Democratic commissioners.
Yeah, although I would argue that's probably a healthier dynamic, that sometimes votes 2 and 3 are Republicans and sometimes Democrats, and even one of each every once in a while wouldn't be. It's probably an indication of healthy rulemaking.
Yeah, I don't think we've seen that at the SEC.
I think
it's either 3-2 Democrats, Republicans, or unanimous. Recently that's all we've seen.
No, I think that's exactly right. So we talked about last year's initiatives, or sort of the 2022 class of initiatives. The 2023 suite of rules that are also in the queue behind the ones we just talked about, that also have fairly significant capital markets implications. Gregg, do you want to quickly run through the sort of the lead items there?
Yeah, so there were a couple of proposals that were a little bit of surprise, but even more surprise once you read them. So probably the one that surprised me the most from a process standpoint was the volume tier proposal. And this has an impact. It certainly really speaks more to the equities markets, but would likely have knock-on impacts on the options market as well, where the idea is, I get choked up.
Yeah, volume tiering always chokes you up. It's
Volume tier. While he's taking a drink, I'll just say that volume tiers, I moderated a panel at Staney, and the exchanges almost came to blows on volume tiers, so I'll let you take back over the situation.
All right, assuming I can talk again. There we go. So the volume tiers, ooh, my voice is terrible on this. Sorry about that. The volume tiers are structured in a way where you're basically saying to a private firm that you have no control of your pricing. You cannot give better prices to people who buy more of your services. So if you think about it from an economic standpoint, that's very strange. Because we do that all the time. You go to Costco, you buy this many muffins, you get a better price than if you just buy one muffin. So there's a lot of economic reasons why this seems like that's something strange. But from a process standpoint, the idea of volume tiers came up in the original 2022 rules. And if you read through the 2022 rules, especially about the NMS rule, it explicitly says volume tiering and banning volume tiering was considered, but it was rejected. We're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to do the following things, and we would like to have feedback on the rule. While the rule is still open, it's still a proposal, they are now asking for comments on what happens if we ban volume tiering completely. So you get into this strange dynamic of the SEC, it looks like you have two competing open proposals at the exact same time. Do you want me to comment on one proposal, or do you want me to comment on the other proposal? Which is why in a lot of the feedback that you see at the SEC, a lot of it is around, we think you need to repropose because we're really not quite sure what you're asking for. And again, that's a very different dynamic. The one where I think we do expect to see a complete reproposal is on the PDA. So I don't know if people have read through the PDA. When I first heard that they were doing a PDA, I said, regulation for PDA? What's wrong with the Palm Pilot? That went out of business like 25 years ago. And it's like, no, it's predictive data analytics. So you sort of really need to read through the rule to try to get a sense of what they're looking at. And I think this really goes to the mantra at a regulator, never let a good crisis go to waste. So large language models come out. There's all this talk about ChatGPT and other things. And every regulator wants to say, well, what's in it for me? What do I do? So the PDA rule is basically an outcome of how can we take all the excitement and buzz about AI and turn that into a rule. If you actually read through the rule, there's very little that has anything to do with predictive data analytics and almost nothing that has to do with large language models. So they have details where they say, we're concerned about someone can put a tweeter out, or tweet, and it could be seen by many people and they can act on that. Okay, yes, that's a concern, but what does that have to do with large language models? I don't know, and I think the feedback that the SEC has gotten has been, we really don't know what it is that you're trying to do with this particular rule, and we have heard that they may be possibly reproposing on that because of that feedback.
Well, and I think if you try to see if there's a theme in terms of the rules that were proposed last year and the rules that are proposed this year, especially around order execution, access fees, PD, one could make the argument, or I have made the argument, right, that these are sort of rules in search of problems, right? That rulemaking generally comes from an identified failure, an attempt to address the failure, an attempt to then modify what that issue is, and even sort of a healthy debate about whether you've got the failure right or whether the failure really exists. Are we in all of these things, having said something nice about last year's rulemaking, I'll now take it back. I mean, is that a lot of where the tension comes from? Is that it just seems to the industry that these are significant lifts that have impact on many, many different types of market participants that are still searching for a problem, or is that a little bit of an unfair criticism?
I mean, I think that's a very good interpretation, right? 605, I think, everyone supported it. FIF has been writing letters for a decade saying we should update this rule. It was a legacy rule that a lot of people weren't able to get a lot of value out of. Great. Good job, guys. Everything else, sort of since then, has seemed very much to be, as you say, it's a solution in search of a problem. What is the commission trying to accomplish here, right? As we said last year, Gensler has a There are a few firms he seems to have a personal vendetta against. And there are business practices that he doesn't like. But then he's taken these myriad rules, right? Ban PFOF. Oh, you could have just banned PFOF. You don't like put a ban in for PFOF. But that's not what he did, right? He went through these complicated rules with the goal being to reduce or disincentivize things like PFOF from existing, and really come up with a something to control it. PDA. I think PDA is a good example, right? AI is, I believe AI is the biggest thing that's going to happen to us since the internet, right? Crypto people said that. I never believed that. AI is definitely, it will change the world in unknown ways, right? 3 years ago, teachers didn't have to put hidden words in so that, include the word banana in your essay, right? Because kids were, just copying to ChatGPT, write me an essay on this topic. There is a fundamental shift in how business and how life happens because of AI. And the PDA proposal came out and said, trend lines should be illegal. And you're trying to be like, how did we get from here to here? Like, yes, there's probably something that has to be done to control the use of AI so that it's not used in a manipulative fashion or to drive conflicting trading. PDA is definitely not that. It's a complete bizarre world. And so I think that what was PDA trying to solve? Well, in theory, it's trying to solve this AI question, but I don't even think we know what the question is with AI, let alone a potential solution.
See, I thought it was just solving balloons and confetti on websites. But
Right.
None of this is free. So the industry has a finite amount of bandwidth. Regulators have a finite amount of bandwidth. So what we would hope is that the regulatory agenda should be focused on what are the things that the industry needs the most. And by that, I don't mean the people in this room, but the people who are the clients of the people that are in this room. And if you look at what the trends have been with retail investors in particular, let's say over the past few years, fractional shares. Everybody wants to trade not a share, but a fractional share. Regulators were way late to the game on this, in spite of the fact that there's been a lot of questions about this in the industry. We now see that FINRA has come out with their proposal for how to report fractional shares. SIAC and UTP have come out with their proposals about how they're going to put this out. But no clearing. Fractional share clearing is years away because DTCC is rightly focused on T+1. So this is something that probably should have been started 2 years ago. Lots of discussion about, say, 24-hour trading. It's been in the news. There's been lots of discussion about that. What are the rules for trading at midnight? Are they the same as trading at noon? Are they different? Or is this the type of thing in 5 years from now, we'll hear from the regulators, oh my goodness, do you know that there are people who are trading at midnight? Yeah, yes, we know that. And there'll be reports about what are you supposed to do, et cetera. Way late to the game. So there's a real need for regulatory guidance in quite a number of areas. PDA is probably not one of them.
But I think it's not that much of a stretch to conceptually say, identify a problem before you present a solution, and perhaps there should be some economic analysis behind it to show that your solution is actually one that will solve the said problem. But we're not seeing that at all.
Well, and I was having a conversation with somebody recently who asked me when I was director of trading and markets, did I read every word that the division put out? And my answer was yes, because I sort of felt obligated to. That answer is no longer yes. It is most assuredly no. I do not read every word that Trading and Markets puts out. But my sense is that among the things where the product is suffering is the economic analysis. And the reason the economic analysis is suffering is because that identification and attempting to get your arms around and scoping the failure that should be at the beginning is being done as an afterthought. And so the economic analysis is rushing to catch up with the solution to the problem, as opposed to being something that's being done as the solutions to the problem, as the problem is being identified and the solutions to the problem are being engineered. You guys, I mean, do you get that sense that the economic analysis is suffering, that creates litigation risk for the commission, and the reason it's suffering is because it's the tail wagging the dog as opposed to something that's helping to drive the train, to mix metaphors terribly?
So I think so. First, I can vouch. Steve really did read every word, including a lot of the words that I wrote. You should have had a lot of red pen in those days. Traditionally, so this ebbs and flows. And over the years, the economic analysis has been tied much closer to the rulemaking, other times not so much. I think we're at one of those really, really low points. But if you look through the economic analysis, there's an interesting pattern. The economic analysis for 605 was stellar because they basically said, here's a problem that we have. Different retail firms have different client flow. Now, how do they know that? Because the whole industry has been saying this for a decade. But they said, so therefore, since there's different client flow, it is possible that you have different experiences, not because anything is wrong, but just because there's different client flow. So they used that, they ran analysis, they showed that in fact was the case. Now that was based on CAT data, which is a little tricky to verify, but they were able to demonstrate that. They weren't throwing stones. They basically said, this is how we support the idea that 605 should be extended to retail firms. So they teed up a problem, and they did an analysis to show this is what happens, and they did an analysis to show that was the answer. And I think that's because they started with the problem. For many of the other rules, they didn't start with a problem. They started with, this is what we would like to do. Now, figure out what the problem is. Now, if you're an economist at the SEC, oh boy, that's a hard job, because sometimes you're justifying something that you're not quite sure if the justification is there. And as we progress in the rules, you can even see in that volume tier proposal rule where they ban it, if you read through this 3 pages of the economic analysis where it says, from economic theory, volume tiering is a good thing. Even more so in the equities markets, if you get rid of volume tiering, you will create a more fragmented market that will make it harder to assess liquidity and potentially make it harder for best execution. Okay, so you're basically saying that this is a bad idea. Then why are we doing it? So it is very, very difficult at the SEC, probably for the economists, to figure out exactly how to measure this.
Jill, do you get the sense that the other regulators are having that same challenge, or is this a broader regulatory issue? Is this an SEC issue, or do you disagree about whether it's an issue at all?
Well, it was definitely an issue when Chairman Gensler was at the CFTC. We had that exact same scenario where the chief economist was given a solution before the economic analysis started. So we sort of tried to back into everything, and that didn't work very well. But I think you're seeing that exact same thing now happen at the SEC.
Yeah. No, I think that would have been my suspicion. I think there is a lot of litigation currently, but probably historically high level of litigation historically pending. The idea that you were reticent about criticizing and suing your regulator seems now quaint and old-fashioned. I think folks would have even been a little bit more constrained on panels like this than in those days. But it genuinely used to be that there was an enormous amount of hand-wringing before a regulated entity would choose to sue their regulator. Obviously, that's just not the case anymore. I also think, from having been on both sides of that table, I think it's now just sort of assumed to be standard practice. I don't think anybody engenders any special ill will by being identified as somebody who's challenging a rule in court. And it's sometimes around the policy, it's sometimes about the economic analysis. I think it's also sometimes just around nuts and bolts adherence to the APA. I mean, I think you talked a little bit about the times where you're putting things out for comment where 2 things go out at the same time, and they say no, you must you can't cross reference each other. You have to treat them all as if they're individual. You have to suspend disbelief. But I tend to think that there are other ways in which the regulators aren't quite as strictly adhering to the APA as they are historically. I think, we've talked about the use of advisory committees, for example.
Yeah, so the advisory committees are under a structure called FACA, the Federal Advisory Committee Act, that was passed in the 1970s. And lots of agencies have advisory committees. The CFTC has kind of had a unique structure in the way they use advisory committees, in that individual commissioners are the designated federal officials for these advisory committees, and they sort of take the subject matter areas under those advisory committees as their individual agendas. And it's evolved over the years to where at this point it's slightly out of control. There's 5 different advisory committees at the CFTC. A couple of them have hundreds of people that serve on those advisory committees. And there's usefulness to it, market participants that are experts in certain areas, that the commission needs that kind of expert advice. But there's, I think, a lot of stress on the participants of these or members of these advisory committees, because they're meeting all over the country and maybe sometimes all over the world, more than quarterly. It's just the usefulness of them seems to have morphed to something more of serving as an agenda, furthering agendas of people who aren't the chair.
Yeah, no, that's so agenda setting sort of more broadly, I think, is something that we see can be challenging. A lot of times it's driven by the chairman. Sometimes people go off in their own directions, and it does seem that it's harder and harder to entirely figure out how agendas are getting set and driven, and how people try to. I think that's less true on the SEC side, because I think as a general matter, the advisory committees are not then chaired by the commissioners. So having chaired one or two myself, I know that they are often a way just to sort of keep issues volume down, not to get volume up. But, talking about like the litigation docket, and I think the ability of the regulators to get away with playing fast and loose with the APA, when you think about the fact that it's no longer considered a third rail to sue your regulator, I think they do have to adjust to that, right? Don't you think that's?
I think so, and it's this is somewhat predictable. I joined the SEC just a few months after they lost the proxy access rule. I can tell you that this was devastating to everybody at the SEC. First, they were sued, which is very, not that usual, and they lost. And they lost based on the economic analysis. And there was a massive undertaking. How do we re-engineer the economic analysis process? Craig Lewis was the chief economist. He wrote up detailed guidelines on how to think about this. The comment process became critical. If you wrote a comment in, the Office of General Counsel would not let us go home at night until we answered every single possible comment. I used to joke that the best thing, if someone wanted to thwart a rule, all you had to do is lob a comment in that said, we think that that Gregg Berman actually might be from another planet, and then they'd have to address that and do something to prove that that's not the case. So we took everything extremely seriously.
And we argued that it was neither true nor not true, it was just not material to the rulemaking.
Exactly, we said we do not have to decide this at this time. So there was a real nervousness about whether or not we were going to be sued. So as we proposed and as we adopted, such focus was spent on, is this litigation proof? It wasn't that we were afraid of being sued, we were afraid of losing. We wanted to make sure that this was so buttoned down that no one would sue us, not because they don't want to sue the regulator, but they'd look and they'd say, we have no case. Why are we throwing our money away and suing this? this is absolutely going to pass the APA. The court will absolutely side with this. But that's an appetite that the commission has to set. If the commission decides that that's not something that they care about, if they start with, so sue me, well, you have a lot more freedom, right? I put out anything. You don't like it? Sue me. It's a very business-oriented way maybe of looking at it. So I think that the litigation really follows from a philosophical change in what the commission perhaps thinks their standard is. Not necessarily judging whether or not it's right or wrong, but it is very, very different from administration to administration.
And I think sort of going even further on the sort of personality, right? The personality is in play, we'll say. There's a much more sort of aggressive stance from the regulator to the industry, right? I work a lot with FIF, which is very much an implementation organization. We don't set policy. We write letters about these are the specific fields that should look like. We're not advising on what things should be. We had a call with the SEC, and we were talking through, some components of 605. They were giving us a bit of a preview a couple months before it came out, and towards the end of the meeting, Chair Gensler said, by the way, we know that you guys think that we should put 605 out and wait for the results of that before putting any of the others in, but we absolutely don't agree with that. And at FIF, we're like, first of all, we never said anything about that. I mean, Gregg was on the call, and we were like, we actually do believe that's the correct way to do things, but we never said anything like that. There was no need for you to come out and sort of on top be like, you're wrong, industry's wrong, 605 is going to go live with everything else at the same time. It was strange. It was a bizarre sort of aggressive, it is very much, you don't like it, sue me. Very aggressive stance on the regulator, which was unusual.
Yeah, and one could argue that that's a rational choice, right? That you either have a real concern about getting sued and losing, or you have a greater appetite for risk when it comes to litigation. The problem with the latter is the loss of credibility and eventually the loss of deference that goes along with that. And that's kind of a legacy you leave for your successors. And everybody who's making these decisions generally are not the career folks. They're there for a finite period of time. And I think it is a shame to see how much less deference the commission has in the Court of Appeals than it had 5 or 10 years ago, but 20, 30 years ago, it's night and day different. So we've been talking about, folks, I think, wanted to hear clarity around how the regulators operate and how they set priorities, and all we've done is create opacity around that. But sort of picking up on that theme, on probably a topic that a lot of folks in the room are interested in. So now that we have Bitcoin ETFs, presumably it should be an easy path to Bitcoin ETF options, right?
You'd imagine if you have an ETF, that an option on an ETF would be a very no-brainer. Like, why should you not be able to do that? And I think this really points to some of the ways that the SEC is operating now that might be certainly different from years past. So many of you know that the only reason why we have an ETF on spot Bitcoin is because of a lawsuit. A lot of press, a lot of retail interest in this, and the SEC lost, and it was a pretty bruising loss. And we now have a Bitcoin ETF. In fact, a lot of firms have put them out. What I thought was quite interesting was how the SEC got to the approval after losing the court case. So if you read through the approval order, it says, well, went to court. The court said that they have reviewed everything, and when we said that the futures market was not a market of sufficient size to be okay from a manipulation standpoint, they said it was. We disagree. We disagree with the court. But we're going to approve it anyway because we reanalyzed some numbers that we had 2 years ago, and if you reanalyze them in a different way, it's okay. And there were 4 detailed letters from each of the commissioners, 2 on the Democrat, 2 on the Republican side, that were very, very telling based on that. First, you had on the one side, basically, and don't take my word, you should actually read them if you haven't, they're on the SEC's website, basically saying, we should have rejected this regardless of what the court said. Real anger about having this product out there. And the chair made some statements that was basically, I wish I could have rejected this, but I can't because the court did say we certainly have no choice. And then on the other side, you had, wait a second, you approved this, but you didn't approve it based on what the court said. You basically said we're going to ignore the court's ruling, but we're going to approve it anyway in a different way. This has massive, massive implications if you're going to start ignoring what an appeals court says about things. So when you stack that up, you recognize that the people who actually vote on these things have very, very strong opinions that seem to be independent of what the court actually said. And to the extent that there is a remorse in the fact that we don't have that Bitcoin ETF, I think an option on Bitcoin is not coming anytime soon. I think they're going to do everything possible, perhaps absent a lawsuit. Now, I have zero inside knowledge on this. Outside of just looking at what the 4 commissioners wrote, it does seem like this is going to be a pretty difficult path to get there until someone pulls the trigger and perhaps has to.
Well, and there's a CFTC implications as well, right?
Right. I mean, the Bitcoin has been designated a commodity, right? Much to the SEC's disappointment, but it is a commodity.
Is it a commodity or is it not a security?
And so, commodities you can, drive truck full through. So, you get a truck full of Bitcoin and you can deliver them to somebody, right? We all know how to do that. Mm-hmm. But it is now considered a commodity, and therefore it has to be approved. It has to be exempted by the CFTC, right? The Bitcoin ETF isn't going to get approved unless there's an exemption from the CFTC. And those don't always come, right? Gold, there are gold ETFs. Options trade on that. What about palladium? There are palladium ETFs. You ever trade an option on those? The CFTC didn't approve it.
That's true.
And so, you have a few layers of the SEC and the CFTC have to come together to approve options on Bitcoin ETFs. And like Gregg said, I don't think that's happening anytime soon.
Technically speaking, unless it violates the act, the CFTC has to approve it. But they just keep letting the clock tick to where there's just never. And so I agree with you. There's lots of these that are laying out there that have been there for years.
And is this one of those regulatory processes that doesn't have a time clock associated with it, where there should be an exemption, there's no legal basis not to grant the exemption, but there's also no specific forcing function?
I think that there have been different commissions that have reviewed this over the years. I mean, that Palladium was on the table when I was at the CFTC, so more than 10 years ago. The time clocks, I don't know. They just keep kicking the can.
The time clock, I think, makes me think of another regulation that we probably should address, which is the market data infrastructure rule. On Monday, the SEC basically filed an extension on responding to it. Now, so what happened with the market data infrastructure rule was that the SEC required the plan participants to provide a consolidated tape plan. They did that. There was a timeline that started when the SEC approved it, but the SEC didn't approve it. And that sort of put the SEC in this bizarre state where they had to somehow do something, but there wasn't a timeline in play to continue it once it was rejected. Now, they required the plan participants to resubmit. They resubmitted. It is now, like I said, on Monday, they published effectively an extension. So they now have 180 days from that in order to come up with whether they will accept the plan participants' proposal. Maybe next year we'll have an MDI to talk about. Maybe we'll be back in the same boat again.
And that was also a result of litigation.
Yes.
Right. So it was mixed. One of the aspects that the SROs had sued on, the court agreed with, and a different aspect that they sued on, the court did not agree with. But that tacked on 12 to 18 months just in the process. And then, as you said, because the SEC did not act right after that immediately, that now dragged it on for quite some time. So we were supposed to have this all implemented by now, and it hasn't even been planned. So it's been delayed very significantly.
So we've got 2.5 minutes, I think, consistent with the theme of too much content, not enough time, which is what the industry is facing. We didn't get to T+1, we didn't get to Basel, we didn't get to SCI. I'm just going to randomly pick one of those three as the last little bit in terms of reinforcing this notion that there's just too much that's being asked and something's got to give and do Basel. So, because I know, Julie, you know more about that than I do, and I don't have to talk about that.
Well, I'll make a couple of really quick points on Basel III. I think, obviously, the U.S. has to implement something there, right? We're trying to coordinate internationally with other regulators. There's 26 countries that have to implement Basel III. The problem is, as we've talked about on a lot of these rules, it ended up being very political votes coming out of the Fed and the FDIC. So you have 11 people approving this Basel III endgame. The vote was 4-2 at the Fed and 3-2 at the FDIC, with Republicans voting no. There's been across the board criticisms, hundreds of comment letters. Even the CFTC commented how devastating it could be for clearing on the derivatives side. There's just problems, across the board that they have to deal with. The issue is, will they repropose, or will they substantially change it in a final rule, which I think is really hard if you don't go out to get additional comment on a substantially reproposed. I mean, I think that breaks APA.
Yep. I think that tied together a bunch of our themes all at once. We do have
ready for
time for maybe
it's too late.
Yeah, yes, exactly. That was Mark's comment on T+1, which is if you're waiting for guidance from this panel, you're already screwed. So I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions if there are any, but we're also fine if folks just want to head to the cocktail party. I think I probably chilled. Oh.
I'm going to ask one. Any predictions for post the election? Will, depending on how the results go, one way or the other, what do you think happens at the agencies?
I think at the CFTC, after this election, Chair Benham will move on. So regardless of whether the next chair is a Republican or a Democrat, you're going to see a substantial, I think, change in agenda there, just based on what's happened the last few years. I mean, maybe I can say this out loud. We hope there's a change at the chair level at the SEC.
Well, and I think historically that has been somewhat the case, right? That even if a chair's term extends through an election, which, because they're 5-year terms, is more likely yes than no, that chairs tend to turn over for the second term of a president. But there are examples to the contrary, and I have zero insight, but if I had to throw $20 down on one side or another, I would say that the exception would be the one that would be honored in this case.
He stays because his term
Yeah,
is
thank
not
you
up
for decoding what I said.
He stays. I mean, Biden wins, he stays. His term is not up until like 2028 or something.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So that's probably right. One thing to consider, though, is this time around, there was a huge influx of new staff coming from outside the industry in other places. A lot of people, when they leave positions or they're doing something and then they come into the SEC, they have a 4-year time horizon tied to the election cycle that has nothing to do with who wins. It's more around they have a certain time commitment before they sort of need to get back. We see that every cycle, that people go out not for politics or anything, it's just time to go back to where it was. And to the extent that there was a very large influx of new folks coming in, we might see a rather large influx of people leaving as they basically just time out for their own schedule.
I don't like to predict regulations based on elections. The last time I tried that, I was on a panel in Chicago, and I talked about how when President Clinton gets elected, we're going to see the 606 regulation come through. I was wrong there, and then I said, well, I guess I have to eat my hat. Clearly 606 is going to be canceled, and then it wasn't. So I'm not very good at these predictions.
There. Fair enough. On that self-effacing note, I think let's thank our panelists for a very good conversation. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions@theoptionsinsider.com.